Hello, this is a presentation of my final thesis that I wrote for my bachelor's degree in media communications. I basically researched the topic of accessibility in UX and UI. The main part of this project was also designing my own example of an accessible app prototype in Figma and testing it with users with different types of disabilities. The testing was a combination of qualitative and quantitative research. So first, the users were presented with tasks, and I observed them while they were solving the tasks, and also I observed their environment, and in the end they also solved user experience questionnaire. The main goal of this project was to research accessibility and also to figure out how to integrate adjusting accessibility into the process of designing web solutions. Now, let's start with a few words about accessibility. So, World Health Organization estimates that there are 1.3 billion people with disabilities in the world, which represents 16% of the whole world population. Because so much of our lives today revolve around the use of the web, it's important that we integrate accessibility into our web products, which means that we adapt them to people with different types of needs or motor limitations. Adjusting accessibility is an important step because with that, we ensure that this segment of population is integrated into society. On the topic of web accessibility, we know different documents. The main standard when we're designing accessible web solutions is a document called Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which was published under the wing of the World Wide Web Consortium. This document basically contains guidelines on how to make web products accessible to users with different types of barriers. There are 3 levels of accessibility mentioned in the document, with A being the lowest and AAA being the highest. So because the document is kind of long and I found it to be kind of unclear, I made a summary of the guidelines and basically made them also into a checklist so you can easily check which guidelines your prototype meets. Now onto the presentation of the actual prototype that I designed. So basically the app that I designed was an accessible farmers market app. And the idea for this project came to be when one day when I was walking past our main farmers market in Maribor, I figured out that it's basically located on a hill and there is very little space between the stands. So it's practically impossible for anyone with any kind of motor limitations to go to the farmers market in person. So from that, the idea was to design an app which solves this problem by enabling users to buy local produce through the app and then having the groceries delivered to their doorstep. So the first step in this project was research. I basically found a paper written by American researchers, which was written on the topic of who visits farmers markets and why. And basically the authors visited different farmers markets across USA, and they interviewed random people visiting the farmers markets to figure out who is the target audience. And basically I based my whole research on this paper, so I wrote also an example of a persona based on the information from this research. The next step in the process was determining the flow of the app. So I made 2 storyboards to kind of figure out how the user comes from the beginning of the user journey to the end. So here is an example of the user journey from inside the app, and here is also an example of a storyboard from like a general standpoint, from finding the ad for this app to having the groceries delivered to the doorstep. So this is kind of more of a general storyboard and user journey. So when I was satisfied with the user flow, I made some wireframes and lo-fi prototypes of each screens, and then connected screens to fit the flow that I determined in the previous step. And then based on that app, I made a hi-fi prototype where I also added graphic elements such as icons, colors, text, etc. I made 5 different versions of the app to fit the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines version 2.2. So the versions of the app that I made were a basic version, so the Slovenian one, an English version, a version with bigger text, desaturated version, and also high contrast version. I also made a feature that the user can stop animations. The last step in the process of designing an app was checking how well the app meets accessibility standards. So I ran through the checklist that I wrote, and I figured out that my prototype meets all A-level guidelines, most AA, and also most AAA requirements. A plugin that helped me a lot in Figma was a plugin called Stark. Basically, I figured out that not all guidelines are possible to include in the prototyping phase, because some guidelines can be included only later on, so in code. But Stark has a feature that basically enables you to write comments for developers, so they can it makes the process of designing easier. In the end, I also ran through a plugin in Figma called Cluify, and this plugin basically helps you analyze screens, and it tells you basically which elements are the most prevalent with the help of AI. The last step in the process was usability testing. So there were 6 users included in the testing, and they were all between 33 and 74 years old. The users had different types of barriers, such as tetraplegia, cerebral palsy, left side neglect after brain stroke, vision impairment, and also blindness. There was also assistive technology included in the testing, which was screen readers, braille displays, and assistive mouse stick used by the user who was a tetraplegic. And now onto the findings from the testing. So the testing basically took place in person, individually with each candidate. The testing took place in the home environments of all participants. So with that, the process was kind of more natural because the users were already familiar with the environment. Shopping process was simple enough for all users to understand, even an elder user who made one prior purchase online before. But there were also some pain points that I found out in the app during this research. A lot of users were confused with the task add item to wish list because there was only an icon and there was no text that explained the purpose of this icon. So in the corrected version, I added text next to the icon to make the call to action clearer. It's also important that we make sure that we avoid ambiguous wording. I had a button in a cart process with the text "continue with purchase." And basically, the users could interpret this also as if they click this, they will be taken back to the shop page instead of the next page in the cart process. I corrected this text to proceed to checkout. It's important also that we make sure that the most important elements are positioned above the scrolling point. It's very difficult for users to scroll for each page, especially if they're using assistive technology such as mouse sticks. A good practice is also to make sure that the button colors change when you hover them with the mouse. It's more clear which elements are the call to action elements. There were also some minor adjustments that I made, so these were not as critical. Some additional changes that I made to the corrected version of the prototype were adding wishlist item button to filters in shop page to make the shopping process easier. During the testing, I had an additional item in the basket, and it confused the users because they thought that I was trying to get them to buy something that they didn't want to. Erased that item later on. The user experience questionnaire showed that the lowest score was in the boring exciting category. So in the future, I would also think about maybe adding additional items to the prototype, maybe thinking about graphics or animations that would make the prototype more exciting for users. So the most frustrating part of testing was using screen readers. Basically, screen readers work in a way that they read HTML code, and Figma has a feature that you can use a prototype with screen readers, and Figma basically transforms elements into HTML automatically. But actually testing it with a screen reader revealed many mistakes, such as it was very unclear where the barrier was between Figma interface and the actual prototype. There was no way to determine text hierarchy. There was trouble with buttons because they divided into more sections, so the user had a lot of trouble determining how the app actually works. Also because editing the code is not available, which would maybe solve a lot of the problems that I encountered. So because of that, I would consider testing with a screen reader again later on, so when the app is already developed. The user gave me some tips also for how to adjust apps for screen readers from his own viewpoint. So it's important that we make sure, if it's possible, we avoid CAPTCHA because it's very difficult for screen readers to interpret, and also to avoid hyphens as much as possible because it can be kind of difficult to for the user to listen to. We have to also add alt text to our images, which ensures that blind users can understand content featured on the images. So the next steps in this project would be implementations with corrections from the usability testing. I would also consider performing another round of tests, mainly to see how well the prototype works for users that use screen readers. Based on the user experience questionnaire results, I would also consider adding new elements such as animations to make prototype more exciting. I can also mention that a big step towards the more accessible web is the European Accessibility Act. Basically, as of June 28, 2025, all companies in private and public sector will have to ensure that their products meet accessibility standards. Here are also the QR codes to the summary of web content accessibility guidelines, so the checklist that you can use, and also the final prototype with corrections from the usability testing, which I made in Figma. That's it. Thank you for listening.